Summary of The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. Two boys are born in London on a day in the autumn, and their lives are completely different from one another. Tom Canty comes from a poor family who are not happy about having a new member. On the other hand, Edward Tudor, the son of King Henry VIII, is highly desired by his family as well as the rest of England. Everyone is happy about Edward's birth, but no one is happy about Tom's. After many years, Tom now lives in a slum called Awful Court. He lives in this one dirty room with his mother, his father John Canty, his grandma Grammar Canty, and his sisters Nan and Bet. John and Grammar are drunks who try to turn Tom and his sisters into thieves. A local priest named Father Andrew stops them and tries to teach the kids about right and wrong. Tom learns to read and write from Father Andrew, and he even teaches him some Latin. Even so, Tom has to beg to make ends meet for his family. If he doesn't get money, Grammar and John beat him. But Tom's mom tries to sneak food into the house at night, even though John hits her for it. Father Andrew often tells stories about kings, princes, and castles. Tom loves to listen to them. Tom really wants to meet a prince one day, and these stories make him want to start talking and acting like a prince. When Tom goes outside to beg one day, he gets lost and ends up a long way from home. He ends up on the same road as Westminster, the royal family's home. Tom walks up to it with great excitement, hoping to see a real prince for the first time. Tom sees a boy dressed in nice clothes and surrounded by staff just inside the gate. Tom puts his face up against the gate to get a better look, but the guards pull him away and tell him to be quiet. When Prince Edward sees this, he runs over to tell the guards to stop. After that, Edward tells Tom to come inside and eat. Tom tells Edward about his life in Awful Court while they are in the palace. Edward says he hopes he could have as much fun with his friends as Tom does. Edward suggests that they switch clothes because Tom says he wishes he could dress like Edward. When the boys take off their clothes and look in the mirror, they are shocked to see that they look exactly the same. When Edward sees that Tom's hand is hurt, he runs outside to scold the guard for it. He can't get back in though, because he's still wearing Tom's clothes. The guards make fun of him because they think he's just a normal beggar. A lot of people are after Edward into the city. Tom starts to worry about getting into trouble when he gets back to the house. When he goes to find Edward, the servants bow down to him, which scares him. He runs back to his room, which starts reports that the prince has gone crazy. King Henry VIII makes a statement that says no one can talk about this, and soon after, two men bring Tom to Henry. It's clear that Henry thinks Tom is Edward, so he asks the boy if he's just kidding. Tom is scared and says that he thinks he will be punished. He thinks this means his son has really gone crazy, but he thinks it will pass soon. Henry wants to kill the Duke of Norfolk right away and tells Tom that Norfolk is a threat to Edward's true claim to the throne. The boy's uncle, the Earl of Hertford, is told by Henry to take him back to his room. In the end, Henry tells Lord St. John to tell Tom, as Edward, to hide as much of the proof of his madness as he can. Henry tells the servants and other people in the house, like Lady Elizabeth and Lady Jane Grey, to ignore the prince's symptoms as well. Everyone feels terrible about how out of place the prince looks now, but no one says anything. At the same time, Henry knows that he is going to die soon. So, he sends Hertford to get the Great Seal, which he had already given to Edward, so that Norfolk can be put to death. When Hertford comes back without it, he says that the prince doesn't know where it is. Henry is mad, but he sends the order with a tiny seal. At a city banquet that night, Tom shows up as Edward, and no one sees the difference. At the same time, Edward gets lost in London and chooses to look for Tom's house in the hopes that Tom's parents can help him get back to the palace. When he gets to Christ's Hospital, he asks if anyone there can help. But the boys outside make fun of him and dunk him in a horse pond. Edward walks around the city idly while wet and muddy until John Canty grabs him. He thinks Edward is Tom and pulls him home while Edward tries to escape. When a stranger steps in, John hits him over the head. Edward is adamant that he is the Prince of Wales at the Canty house. Tom's mom and sisters say that Tom has gone crazy, and they try to keep him safe from John's abuse. Edward falls to the ground in a corner and tries to sleep after being hit. What about Tom's mother? She stays awake and thinks why her son seems so different that night. He is put to the test to see if he is really her son. When Tom is surprised, he has a strange habit of putting his hand up in front of his eyes with the palm facing out. His mother tries to get Edward to do the same thing by hitting the ground by his head, but it doesn't work. She thinks this is just another sign that she is crazy. Someone comes and bangs on the canty door in the morning to tell them that the guy John hit the night before was Father Andrew, who is now dying. John gets scared and tells his family to run away. They run out of the house and into a huge crowd of happy people outside. John tells everyone to go to London Bridge, but the crowd makes it easy for people to get lost. He goes to Guildhall because he knows Tom will be there for the city's dinner. Anyone who sees him doesn't believe he's the prince, and they make fun of him. Michael is taken to London Bridge by a man called Miles Hendon. A palace servant runs into Guildhall and tells everyone that King Henry VIII has died. Tom gets a bow from everyone. Tom is shocked and asks Hertford if he can give an order. Since Hertford says he can, Edward tells someone to set Norfolk free. Everyone cheers for Tom and says that the rule of blood is over. Thomas hears the news that Henry has died as Hendon walks him through the streets. Edward tries to tell Hendon who he is when they get to his place of residence, which makes Hendon think the boy is crazy. Hendon is shocked when Edward tells him to wait for him and won't let him sit down. When Edward asks Hendon about his life, Hendon says that 7 years ago, his father, the Baronet Sir Richard Hendon, sent him into the army as a punishment because his sneaky younger brother Hugh told Sir Richard that Hendon planned to kidnap their rich cousin Lady Edith and marry her instead of their older brother Arthur. Hendon gets Edward new clothes the next day while he is still sleeping. A servant tells Hendon when he gets back that a young man came to get Edward and a strange man followed them to Southwark. It's his promise to find Edward and save him. Edward follows the kid to a barn that has been left empty. Inside, John Canty shows himself and says he's going to change his name to John Hobbs. Hugo, the young man, laughs at Edward's confusion. John tells Edward to take a break, so Edward makes a bed out of some hay in the corner. He wakes up to a loud party going on in the barn. A group of oddballs are drinking and telling stories. It is clear that John used to be in the gang, and most of them know who he is now. A man named Yokel used to be a farmer. He tells how his mother was burned as a witch for letting a patient die, how his wife died after being beaten for begging, how his children starved to death, and how Yokel himself was burned and sold into slavery for begging too much. Edward stands up and says that he will change the rules once he is king again. The head of the gang, the Ruffler, stops John from hurting Edward even though everyone makes fun of him. The next day, Edward gets away while he and Hugo are being sent to beg. He stays with a loner who used to be a Catholic priest. The monk tries to kill Edward when he learns that his father is Henry VIII, who got rid of the Catholic Church. Hendon steps in to stop the monk from killing Edward, but the hermit takes Hendon away before he can find Edward. Right away, John and Hugo show up and take Edward away again. Hugo sets up Edward to be accused of theft, which he does. But Hendon shows up and threatens a police officer so that Edward can get away. Edward is brought to Hendon Hall by Hendon. Hendon was hoping for a warm welcome, but his brother Hugh told everyone that he wasn't really Miles Hendon. Hugh even got his wife, Lady Edith, to lie about it too. Arthur and Sir Richard are both dead. Hugh then puts Hendon and Edward in jail. Edward makes friends with 2 old women in jail, and he is shocked to learn that they are there because they are Baptists. When the guards bring the prisoners outside the next day, Edward is shocked to see them set fire to the 2 women. He thinks that jail time is the worst thing that could happen to them. After this, Edward talks to other prisoners and is shocked to learn that many of them are going to be killed or cut up for small crimes like taking clothes. Hendon gets to spend 2 hours in the pillory, but Edward gets off with a warning from the judge. He gets in trouble outside for yelling at people who throw eggs at Hendon in the pillory. Hugh says Edward should get whipped, but Hendon sets his sights on getting whipped instead of Edward. They then return to London with Hendon. People say that the new king is kind and fair, so Hendon thinks that he will help him get his inherited rights back. When they get back to London, Hendon and Edward get lost in the crowd of people there for the crowning. Tom has grown to love living in the house since then. During the coronation parade, Tom is amazed by how many people are cheering and how beautiful the city is decorated. But on the way to Westminster Abbey, Tom sees his mother and she knows who he is. When she comes up, Tom says he doesn't know her, and guards take her away. Right away, Tom feels terrible about what he did, and his heart keeps getting heavier as the coronation ritual goes on. Edward shows up in his underwear and stops the event before Tom can be crowned. Hertford, who is now Duke of Somerset, wants proof, so he asks Edward where he put the Great Seal. Tom agrees that Edward is the real king. At first, Edward doesn't remember. Tom helps Edward remember where it is when he realizes he knows where it is. The seal is where Edward said it would be when St. John runs to the castle. Hertford tries to put Tom in jail, but Edward stops him. After this, Edward is finally crowned as King of England. During the crowning, Hendon looks for Edward but can't find him. He chooses to get help at Westminster, and is shocked when a guard leads him to a government official who shows him into a room full of nobles. When Hendon sees Edward on the throne, he feels shocked and ashamed that he had called Edward crazy. Edward makes Hendon Earl of Kent and puts Hugh in jail. Hugh is never charged because Hendon and Edith refuse to speak against him. He does, however, die soon after, and Hendon then marries Edith. Edward makes Tom the king's ward and gives him special clothes to show that he has been a royal person and should be treated with respect because of that. Edward tries to fix all the wrongs and unfair things he saw outside the palace during his short rule. He still has a lot of friends, including Tom and Hendon. Tom lives a long life and is admired by everyone. Even though Edward dies young, his short rule is known for being kind and good.
About the author. Mark Twain grew up in Hannibal, Missouri. Samuel Clemens, who wrote under the name Mark Twain. Clemens loved living near the Mississippi River. The stories of the adventures of Tom Sawyer and the adventures of Huckleberry Finn were based on his youth in Hannibal. John Clemens died in 1847, which was very sad. Jane and their children had to work hard to make ends meet. When Clemens was in the 5th grade, he quit school to work as a typesetter. It was at this job that he started sending newspaper stories and sketches. The pieces did well, and Clemens went on to write for important newspapers in Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Cincinnati. Even though Clemens loved writing, he wanted to be a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi River. With the help of another pilot named Horace E. Bixby, he was able to get his license. In 1861, when the Civil War started, Clemens joined the Confederacy for a short time. But he quickly changed his mind and went to Nevada to work for his other brother. Clemens worked as a miner and went around the American West, where he got ideas for his books. That same year, Twain wrote a story called The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. The story became a big hit right away and gave Clemens new opportunities. A local newspaper paid for him to travel around Europe, which gave him ideas for his book Innocents Abroad, 1869, and helped him meet Olivia Langdon, the woman who would become his wife. Olivia put Clemens in touch with abolitionists like Harriet Beecher Stowe and Frederick Douglass after he married Olivia. They moved to Hartford, Connecticut. Many of Clemens's best-known books, like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and The Prince and the Pauper, were written while he lived in Hartford for 17 years. Oxford University gave Clemens an honorary doctorate in letters in 1907, and he continued to be very famous with readers in the United States. But in 1909, Clemens said he would die when Halley's Comet came closest to Earth. It happened to be the year he was born, right after the comet was last seen close to Earth, in 1835. In fact, Clemens did die of a heart attack the day after the comet came closest to Earth in 1910.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.